Good day, strategy gamers, and welcome to an unboxing video of Crimea, Conquest and Liberation. This is the latest entry in the Operational Combat series produced by Multiman Publishing. It's designed by Guy Wild and Anthony Burkett as two designers for this game. The series, of course, is Dean Essig, who began the series in the 90s. And then we have the game developer as the head honcho himself, Chip Saltzman. This is one that's been on my list for a long time, ever since I picked up Third Winter. I've been hoping to get this. For those unfamiliar, this game covers, of course, Crimea in the Eastern Front during World War II. But what makes this particularly interesting is it's rather two games in one, in the sense that Guy Wild has designed a series of scenarios and game for the Axis conquest of Crimea in the early war on the East Front, whereas Anthony Burkett's design tackles the liberation by the Soviet forces of Crimea in 43-44 and how that campaign played out. And what's of particular note is this is also the second game in the Ostfront series of Operational Combat East Front theater that Anthony Burkett's doing, and this joins with the Third Winter game if you so choose. You do not have to. This is a completely standalone game, but if you own the Third Winter, you are able to actually put this game joined to the Third Winter. It has full rule support for that, and it really makes the Third Winter more interesting because on the southern edge of the map of the Third Winter, it's no longer this hard boundary, but rather you have the Crimean theater, which of course there was plenty of action and coordination around. So really kind of completes the Third Winter in a sense. And again, this is the second in that Ostfront series, which covers the entire Eastern Front, the kind of or the liberation, if you will, of that theater in late war. And games 3 and 4 are coming out and in development in the near future. So quite exciting. It comes in a pretty standard package size from Multiman Publishing. It's not one of the thicker boxes like you'll see with Third Winter. It is the 20th game in the Operational Combat series. And on the back here, we have just a nice little screenshot of the map and some of the counters. And short little description, as I mentioned, the game covers both the early campaign by the Axis forces in 41 through 42, and then the liberation by the Soviets in 43 to 44. It covers the full Crimean theater as well. It doesn't really leave much out. You can see here the Kerch Strait, so it goes quite a bit to the east, whereas I think other iterations sometimes of this theater have cut off a little bit of that peninsula. We also have a total of 7 scenarios in the game. It's nice. I think it's 3 for the early war and then 4 for late war with the liberation, and the scenarios range from 4 turns up to the largest being 36 turns. So that's a pretty healthy range. It is a one mapper game as well, and counter density is pretty light at 840 counters. 560 of those, I believe, are just combat counters. The rest are Operational Combat series markers. So it's something that, I'd be willing to bet this the shorter scenario, Eviction Notice, which is a 4-turn scenario, you could certainly complete in one sitting in an evening face-to-face, possibly even the 10-turn scenarios if you have a little bit of a longer day ahead of you. So it's something that's very manageable if you want to get into the Operational Combat series. Anthony Burkett did comment in an interview with the Player's Aid that he does see this as a great kind of entry into the Operational Combat series. Historically, Reluctant Enemies and Sicily, Smolensk as well, have been some of the recommended games to get into the series, but I think Crimea is going to certainly rank with them as a great entry point. And it includes the newest 4.3 OCS rules, all of that, which we'll get into. We'll go through a lot of the components as we actually open it up, but pretty standard. We've got a game rule book, there's a specific playbook, charts and tables, standard, the one map, 840 counters, you've got some terrain effect charts, player aids, and the classic two-sided dice that are provided, or the two six-sided dice that are provided. So also rates complexity at medium, solitaire suitability at medium. If you're new to Operational Combat series, I'm a big believer that, this is a great solitaire system. Maybe it's just me, but the way the turns flow, especially if you're in a larger Operational Combat series game, you can do what I do, and I'm not alone in this. You sit down, you play one turn as one side, you come back the next day, and you've probably forgotten most of the strategy or the hidden agenda that you perhaps had. So I think it plays quite well, solitaire, myself. With all of that intro, let's go ahead and open this box up a little bit and see its contents. So we'll just cut through here. Let's see what we have. Now, right off the bat, what I am going to do actually is dig out the map, and I want to lay that down first, so that way it can be the backdrop as we go through the rest of the contents of the box. It is a one map, but they are still rather large maps, so we're not going to be able to see everything. We'll get this centered here and we can take a look at it. Great quality as always. I mean, if you didn't know, Dean Essig, who still does a lot of the map work with Anthony Burkett on this particular game, but Dean's background was actually in cartography, so it's always kind of cool seeing how he produces these. And overall, I gotta say, it's looking great. You certainly know this about the Crimean theater, but you can already just tell from a little glance, and I'll maybe move it over a little to the right here. There is plenty of interesting terrain that will make the combat pretty dynamic, I feel. A lot of choke points. In the south here, of course, you have some tougher terrain to deal with. And then you can see in the north how this connects into the Ukrainian theater of the Third Winter with Kherson and Mariupol. It's going to be quite interesting to get this on the table with the Third Winter. That is of particular interest to me. Back to the box, though, and the rest of the contents that we have. So here's one of the dice, but we see the nice little multi-man publishing slip of all the contents that we should expect. It's always a nice touch when the publishers do this, just so you can make sure that we have everything inside. First up is Operational Combat Series. This looks like the game-specific rules. So we see here, some general commentary about the map and terrain and probably different rules relating to them. We then get into detail about the off-map boxes, how to handle the Kerch Strait. What's of particular interest as well is, this Crimean theater saw some very interesting engagements and equipment used. So torpedo bombers come into play as there was some naval work that was happening. You have Dora in the game. It's the massive artillery gun placed on rail that is, probably quite impactful in the game, but it's nice to see that it's represented. You also had some naval units that are in the game that were actually part of the fighting in Sevastopol, as the Soviets found that sometimes having those naval units in port was actually safer than out in the open sea in parts of the war. And yeah, just going through for both the Soviets and the Axis specific rules that we have for the game. Front headquarters do make an appearance in the game. So if you haven't played with those, I think they made their first introduction in Hungarian Rhapsody, I want to say. But a great new kind of feature they've been adding to OCS, and I think it plays a bigger part when you connect this to the Third Winter game as well. And then a number of optional rules, which is nice. I believe as well, I don't know if it's in this booklet or another, but they've also added some random events with this game. Yes, here we go. So, random events, you have those in the Beyond the Rhine game and Operational Combat series. But I think this is my first time seeing it on one of the East Front games where we have some random events. So there's a random events table, it looks like, in the playbook that we can take a look at to see what some of those random events are. So overall, a nice game-specific rules book. It is on I'd call this a glossier print than the normal 4.3 cardstock that they usually put things on. But nice and thick, good quality, as you would expect with the series. Then we have our first counter sheet, and this one looks like it is all of the Soviet units. You see air as well, and some general game markers as well there. Have our first charts and tables. This is 4.3. This is a nicer stock. This is like 110 weight or something like that. Much sturdier, taking a look actually next to me here, than the other copies that I have. So it certainly feels nice. I'll be curious. I'm always, bending the crease here. So I'll see how that maybe holds up over time. But it certainly feels nice in the hand, having that a little thicker stock. We have an Access tables display for replacements and supply. It's really nice when, I love it when they do a couple of aids that are of varying sizes such as this, because as you're setting up the entire game space, then you don't have to always try to fit in a massive 8.5 by 11 sheet somewhere. Sometimes you have room just to squeeze in, a half sheet like this. So nice display table, single-sided, but talking about replacements and supply that comes in. Then we have the first Access player display, so general records track where you can keep track, and then breakdown units and your dead pile. Pretty large dead pile in terms of space for something with so many counters. That's a little interesting. Get that dice out of here. Terrain effects chart. I think it said there were 2 of these in the box. But again, this is a nice heavy stock. All of the paper, actually, I'm just noticing it feels a little nicer than in some other games. So glad to see them investing in that. And they've done a little bit of a rework almost in the design of the terrain effects chart here. Visually, it's quite nice. Set that aside. Then we get to the counters for the Access player. You can see they have a little less, and that's pretty standard. You have, sometimes higher action rating or quality units on the Access side in this particular theater, and the Soviets more so with the quantity. And we're mixing in, again, a lot of different markers. We see pontoons, which is exciting to see there. We see as well the battleship Sevastopol, that the Soviets had that saw action in this theater. And then we also have, looks like fighters tactical. I was curious, there's supposed to be torpedo bombers in here as well, but I'm not. Here we go, some torpedo bombers. Henkel 111H is there. Some front markers. And as always, these are what you'd expect from any other counter in a MMP game, specifically OCS as well. Quality looks just fine. The equivalent Soviet table display, a little half sheet, again, nice. There is, amphibious landing rules in this game as well, where you can prep for an amphibious landing, which I think adds, again, a great dynamic element to the play, opens up a lot of different possibilities in terms of how a given scenario might play out. It's nice to see that. And then you can see we've got the 4th Ukrainian front and the coastal front as the 2 fronts that the Soviets have here. Those supply numbers, I'm just looking at them. That's not a lot of supply. I know it's not many units, but it doesn't seem like a lot of supply, especially excuse me, in the early war, which you'd expect kind of given the situation. 42, it certainly jumps up. And then late war, I'd actually almost expect late war to be a little more, but certainly they had their own logistical challenges getting stuff to the Crimean area. Now here we have a playbook for Crimea, and this is nice. It looks like they've kind of split up the game-specific rules in this playbook, and in the playbook we'll see the 7 different scenarios that the game contains, order of arrival, and then it looks like we've got a lot of great detail in the back as well. So the very first scenario, rite of passage. So this is the long campaign of the Axis conquest of Crimea. If you want to play that, 28 turns. Really, really excited by some of the scenarios that they've chosen in here. This is all very much as expected looking in the format of the scenarios. A nice little abbreviations list. I feel like I've seen it before in other OCS content, but it's not sticking out to me, where we have the usual designer notes from both Guy and Anthony, and then we have some developer notes by Chip, historical commentary. They always do such a good job with this to just understand a little bit about the theater if you're not too familiar with the historical context. And I'll be honest, the Crimean campaigns are not something I have a great historical knowledge of myself. So certainly we'll be looking to do some pairing of a book or a read with this as well. This is a lot of historical commentary, actually, looking at this. And it appears as though it's actually laid out by scenario. That's wonderful. So you can actually see for the given scenario that you're looking at playing what some of that historical context is. That's a great idea to kind of format it in that way. So that way you don't necessarily have to invest into reading through everything if you're just going to do one 4-turn scenario, right? And you just want a little bit of background. So we have gameplay considerations, just a little bit of advice for both sides here as you're playing in the different time periods. It's good just to kind of have some, high-level guiding principles from experts. Look at this wonderful bibliography as well. So we can go through here probably and look for some books to pair with the playthrough. And then we have the random events table. So it happens each turn. You roll for a random event. On a 5 to 6, you have a random event. And the random events are all listed here. There's actually quite a few here on page 27. So it looks like based off the dice roll, that's what we use to determine which random event it is. Quite interesting. And it continues on to the back page, so we go all the way through random event number 66. So pretty much the combinations you can have with 2 6-sided dice. So that's quite a bit of kind of, extra content. And what I think is so interesting about it is, there are certainly some games in the series, and this is a comment more generally on the Eastern Front, where it can feel a little static and repetitive with one large line pushing against another, continuously just trying to get a little bit incremental ground, getting pockets where you can, etc. And the terrain is usually pretty consistent too. But I think there's going to be a lot of dynamic interaction with this game, given the geography, the random events, as well as the considerations, I think, for the players if they combine it with the Third Winter, as they're trying to manage a larger theater of operations. We then have our second terrain effects chart, so same as the first one. This is a Soviet player display 2. Again, I just love when they do this. It could have been one sheet, and perhaps some prefer just to have this on one sheet. But now, again, if you're lacking a little bit in some of that table space in your setup, this gives you more flexibility of where you put these different aids, instead of having to be forced to always use a full sheet in every instance. Here's a Soviet player display, so much like the Axis, you have your general records track, but then you also have your front HQ, artillery barrage, and it looks like a track to keep track of preparing for amphibious landing, which will be exciting to see in this game. Generic Operational Combat Series markers. So I will comment that, certainly this size of box will probably fit all the counters inside of it with maybe a standard GMT tray or a similar storage solution. However, if you're not worried about ever selling your Operational Combat Series games, setting up a separate tray just with generic OCS markers is a great way to really try to consolidate, and you can just pull that out in any OCS game you're playing, and gives you a little bit more storage flexibility and organization in the game boxes themselves. But not a great idea if you're ever planning on reselling. This does happen occasionally with, I've noticed, the MMP counter specifically, where we get, and I'm not technical enough to understand why, but you get just a little bit of a warp here in the die cut on these counters. Maybe you can see it better on the back side. It's almost like it's a bubbling action or something like that. You just have to be careful sometimes when punching those out to make sure it doesn't tear up any of the paper. But overall, the counters you would expect in an OCS game. We have our second charts and tables, same as the first. And then we have the great series rules, version 4.3. No changes now, probably in, going off memory here, I think the last 4 or 5 games since they've had an update to the series rules, I want to say. So if you're new to the series itself, great rule set. Everything is very well documented. It's easy to read through, and it's just free of errata. It's very polished. To be fair, they've had almost 30 years to make sure that it's polished, but I think there are a few series rule books out there that best the Operational Combat Series rules. Again, this is on a different cardstock than I think I've seen in the other games. It's got just a little bit of a smoother finish to it. And, again, overall, first impressions are very positive. Looking at it as well, we do see color, which is always a nice touch. And we still have some of the examples of places. A little interesting, the counters, it looks like, are color, not the map itself. I wonder if that was maybe a post-edit where they were able to replace the counters, but not the full map visual. Yeah, no need to nitpick, though. A great set of rules for anybody looking to learn the game. And then we have our second of the 6-sided die that the game provides. This is a game, as I mentioned at the beginning, that I've been looking forward to for quite some time. Had it on pre-order as soon as it went up here in 2023. And overall, again, just even taking another glance at the map, I think this will be a very interesting map to play Operational Combat Series on, just because the geography is so unique. I'm trying to think through the different games in the series when you consider, even the North Africa games of DAC and Tunisia. It's pretty consistent. I think probably the closest comparison I can think of to maybe what this reminds me of would maybe be Sicily, just because it does feel maybe a little bit more compact. And Sicily does have, some bottlenecks on it. But I don't think it's anywhere to the degree that Crimea offers here. Burma may be the other consideration, just again, given the variety of terrain considerations in that game. But very excited for this one, and equally so to try to combine it with the Third Winter and begin the first forays into the Ostfront series with the combined game system. I don't think I mentioned it, but there are in the rules very kind of clear documentation of how to combine this with the Third Winter and the other games in the Ostfront series. And as those games release, they will, according to Anthony, continue to have that documentation of how the how the components and the maps all come together to be one concise game, if you will. If you happen to have the table space to cover the entire Eastern Front at a, 5-mile hex diameter. So thank you so much, everyone, for watching, and look forward to hearing what you think about OCS, Crimea, Conquest, and Liberation. As always, strategy gamers, hoping you have yourselves an excellent day.